Let's begin by the first speaker. The title is the Oriental Abduction. The title is a very interesting one for me. Okay, we will listen to you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Sundar Kim. Thank you for organizing this wonderful event, and thanks also to the colleagues for participating in this gathering. I will now share the screen. Good. So this is the title of the presentation, The Oriental Abduction, a short semiotic history of serendipity. Last night, actually, there was an instance of serendipity because I was thinking about the last touches to give to this presentation of mine, and I happened to find out that my apartment in London was just beside the Korean embassy in London. So it was an incredible case of serendipity. There was a picture taken last night in London. So the history of serendipity is deeply linked with two of my current research topics. The first is the face, and in particular its visual representation, the central theme of the European project I'm leading in Turin, Facets, Face Aesthetics in Contemporary Technological Societies, is precisely the meaning of the face in the digital age. The second theme is travel, which, more than an object of analysis, is in my trajectory as a researcher, a practice, a work, and a personal obsession. The image on the right shows a portrait of Bianca Capello, lover and then wife of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Francesco I, the Medici. This woman's life was full of intrigues, as was her death, which took place mysteriously the day after her husband's death on October 20th, 1587. There's still a lot of debate among experts about whether the cause of it was malaria or arsenic. In any case, the portrait that appears on the right is attributed to the workshop of Alessandro Lori and was painted between 1560 and 1585. It is a detached fresco that is separate from the wall, measuring 75 per 52 centimeters, and currently in the Museum of the Uffizi in Florence. Bianca's face seems to match the description of her that Montaigne, after meeting her in Florence, wrote in a passage of his Voyage. Belle à l'opinion italienne, un visage agréable et impérieux, les corsages gros et des tétins à leur souhait. Montaigne seems to relativize the beauty of Bianca Capello and to link it to the Italian taste for big breasts. Another tireless traveler, however, whose taste was not French but English and belonged to another era in sensitivity, fell madly in love with this image of a woman, the British writer Horace Walpole, author of The Castle of Otranto, the Castle of Otranto, il Castello di Otranto. As he recounts it in one of his many letters, Walpole fell in love with Bianca in effigy during a trip to Florence. A portrait of the woman, perhaps the one shown here, decorated a wall of Casa Vitelli, where the English writer stayed. A few years later, in 1752, another Horace, namely Horace Mann, a legate of the United Kingdom in Florence, who was a friend and correspondent of Walpole, bought the painting and on his Mann's return to England in 1754, offered it to his writer friend. In a letter sent to Horace Mann on January the 28th, 1754, Walpole wrote about the arrival of the portrait in his house as if it were the arrival of a wife. Her Serene Highness, great Bianca Capello, is arrived safe at a palace lately taken in gentry and pleases universally by the graces of her person and comeliness of her deportment. In the same letter, referring to his desire to give the painting a frame worthy of his painted wife and to inscribe on it the coat of arms of the Capelli family, Walpole announces what he thinks is a great discovery. In a Venetian heralded book, he found not one but two coats of arms of the Capelli family, one containing a hat, cappello in Italian, and the other with a hat underneath three lilies, the symbol of the Tuscan ruling aristocratic family. Walpole explains the difference as a concession from the Grand Duke of Tuscany to his lover, then wife. In fact, the finding is uncertain. The coat of arms of the second type was a probable concession of King Charles VI to Filippo di Barone Capelli, ambassador to France in 1382. It therefore dated at least from 2 centuries before the time of Bianca. What matters, however, is not the philological exactitude of this discovery, but the epistemological attitude through which Walpole reacted to it. It is precisely in this context, when he speaks of how passionate about the painting of a woman he found the perfect coat of arms to frame her image, that Walpole invented for the first time in this letter of 1754 the English word serendipity. This word therefore indicates, from its first appearance, an unexpected discovery favored by a passion related to a visual simulacrum. Moreover, since the first creation of this neologism, its meaning is also inseparable from the idea of travel, from the idea of finding something unexpected while traveling. Now, in the above-mentioned letter, Walpole explains to Horace Mann the meaning of the neologism that the English writer has just created in reference to a book of travel literature. I once read a stupid fairy tale called The Three Principles of Serendip. While their highnesses traveled, they always discovered by chance and with wit things they were not looking for. In 1557, indeed, a Venetian printer named Tramezzino published a small volume of Oriental tales entitled Peregrinaggio di tre figliuoli del re di Serendippo. The cover of the book announced that it had been translated from Persian into Italian by Mr. Cristoforo Armeno. This pamphlet, a description of the travels and adventures of the three princes of Serendip, was very successful. It was reprinted in later editions in Italy, it was soon translated into German, and it was rewritten or imitated several times in France, although never correctly translated into French. One of the French adaptations of the book, edited by Chevalier de Mailly, was later translated into several European languages, including English. The volume, entitled Le Voyage et les Aventures des Trois Princes de Serendip, first appeared in Paris in 1719 and was reprinted in Amsterdam in 1721. It was then reprinted in Paris and Amsterdam in 1788 in an anthology entitled Voyage Imaginaire, edited by Gamier. The English edition, entitled The Travels and the Adventures of the Three Princes of Serendip, was published in London by William Chetwynd in 1722. Horace Walpole, as a child, read Miley's book, and it was a memory of it that led him, years later, to invent the word serendipity. As it was pointed out earlier, Horace Walpole first used the word in a letter of 28th of January 1754, written to his friend Horace Mann, the British ambassador to Florence. In the letter, Walpole explains its meaning in the sense of accidental sagacity, a quality enjoyed by the three princes, who, as Walpole points out in the letter, always made discoveries by chance and with a sagacity triggered by things they would not seek. And he adds, no discovery of anything one is looking for fits that description. Now, this is the way in which usually Korean translates serendipity, serendipity. And it is interesting that the image that Wikipedia Korea chooses to illustrate the meaning of the word serendipity is a picture taken by a lucky accident. There is a picture of a bird in which all of a sudden another bird that is flying close by is captured in the photograph. But the most important reference to serendipity in Korea is another one. Korean colleagues might remember that serendipity is also the title of a famous Korean song by Korean boy band BTS, sang as a solo by member Jimin, and originally released digitally on September the 8th, 2017. Now, this is the video.
the song?
우리 질이 더럽혀 어쩌면 우리 성리 그냥 그랬던 거야 You know I know 넌 설레는 만큼 많이 두려워 분명히 우리 자꾸 질투해서 너만큼 나도 많이 무서워 When you see me, when you touch me 수가 우릴 위해 움직였어 조금의 여긴남조차 없었어 너만의 행복은 예정됐던 걸 Cause you love me and I love you 넌 내 푸른 곰팡이 날 구원해준 나
Okay, I think this is enough, because what actually struck me in this song was that when I first listened to the song and tried to translate its lyrics, I was particularly impressed by the following stanza and by the sentence that says, "You are my blue mold." This was at least the translation of one of the lines of the song given by Google Translator. But then I realized that that was a wrong translation, because the song in this line, Neon Nai Puleon Gompangi, doesn't mean you are my blue mold, but you are my penicillin. And the reference is to the discovery of the penicillin by Alexander Fleming, one of the most famous and quoted instances of serendipity in the history of science. So it is maybe not the most romantic metaphor in song history, but it's nevertheless a clever reference to this scientist. The lyrics then are meant to say that serendipitously found love saved the singing narrator, exactly as penicillin, discovered by serendipity, saved many times. So the author of these Korean lyrics might well have understood the deep meaning of the word serendipity better than many online dictionaries that propose as synonyms of the word ein good luck, which is not exactly the right translation. Other dictionaries seek to render the meaning of it through a periphrasis, uyon an balgyon, accidental discovery. In reality, serendipity is not simply luck. It is not simply accident either. It is accidental discovery favored by an open attitude towards the unforeseen. So I would like to conclude to propose a semiotic interpretation of the long and labyrinthine cultural history of the concept of serendipity, an interpretation linked with the concept of abduction, but also with Lotman's cultural semiotics. In my opinion, the notion of serendipity has a typical Asian trait whose epistemological model contrasts with the typical European teleological trajectory. In the preface to the Peregrinaggio, after having praised God, the author Cristoforo Armenio declares that it's from Tauris. It is a reference to the city that is now called Tabriz in northwestern Iran, near ancient Armenia, still known for its large Armenian population. So what is the story of this book published in the 16th century? The book begins by telling that a certain king of Serendip had 3 sons. Being a very caring father, he had given them the best possible education. Thus, when they were fully educated, he put them to the test, and although he approved of them, he feigned anger and banished them, hoping that elsewhere they could gain even more experience and wisdom by applying their knowledge into practice. So contrary to what often happens in Western narratives, in this case, the 3 heroes have no specific mission to accomplish. This is not a narrative as the ones analyzed by Prop or the ones analyzed by Grimmes. It's an Asian narrative. It's a narrative without a goal, because the goal is not the objective to be attained. The goal is the way of getting the goal itself. Se hace camino al andar, no? Could say my friend Jose Maria Pascal. So this improvement, however, according to the scheme that is prepared for them by their father, does not occur in the achievement of a goal through a trajectory, but by accident and wandering in both epistemic and motor sense. What the 3 protagonists must achieve, in fact, is not a specific objective, but a pragmatic ability to interpret and react to the unexpected, a skill that, according to the father, will be very important to them in the future life. So, in the history of the travels and interpretations of the three princes, a contrast to the traditional Western narrative emerges. So, as to avoid any Orientalism, however, one could suggest that this opposition is between different narrative ideologies and not between East and West. On one hand, in the West, a story of performance, trajectory, and purchase of the object by the subject prevails, a story in which any unexpected event is only an obstacle to overcome in order to achieve the final goal. On the other hand, in the East, a story of competence, of wandering, of a subject who never reaches his object or object because the same obstacles that stands in his her way turns into new objects of the purchase. In the Western tale, the hero must overcome the vicissitudes. In the Eastern one, the hero must adapt to them, transform them into a new meaningful journey. So these two narrative ideologies obviously also linked with two opposing existential ideologies, one of the conquest of the world by the subject, the other of the adaptation of the subject to the world, gave different weight to science and to the various modalities of their interpretation. In the narrative of trajectory, deductive reasoning and inductive investigation prevail. In the history of serendipity, on the other hand, abduction is central. After all, the real purpose of travel is to refine the ability to understand the inevitable serendipities of the world, and this ability is essentially a semiotic skill, an ability to cost-effectively interpret the signs of an unknown world and to turn them into one's advantage. Now, modern philosophy realizes that in the history of the three princes hides a new cognitive model, which perhaps more than the Western classical one, adapts to the new epistemological conditions of the modern world, and even more to those of the postmodern world, in which an increasingly explosive complexity makes the idea of a deductive trajectory unachievable. Voltaire's satirical novel, Zadig, contains an episode in which the hero identifies two lost animals, the horse of the king and the dog of the queen, without having seen them. Researchers have shown that the abduction capacity evoked by Voltaire has its indirect source in the history of the Princess of Serendip, probably read by Voltaire in the French translation by Simon Gueulet, published in 1712. Significantly, indeed, the subtitle of the novel Zadig is Oriental Story. Voltaire was looking for another way of treating science, and he found it in this Oriental tale. Voltaire was also very interested in Korea, as you might know, as he wrote in his notebooks. The more I would like to extend my knowledge of history, the more I realize that it is a sense necessarily limited. An Asiatic, an inhabitant of the vast country of China, scarcely knows of our existence, and our Europe is for him what Korea and Northern Japan are for us. For Voltaire, Korea was the epitome of the unknown land of Asia. The notebooks by Voltaire are full of references to Korea. Modern philosophy, as I was saying, realizes the importance of this new paradigm for the interpretation of science. But of course, we cannot mention Zadig by Voltaire as semioticians without mentioning the new version of the tale offered by Umberto Eco in The Name of the Rose. In The Name of the Rose, among the different main characters, Guillaume de Baskerville and Atzo de Melk, make in the story, that of the horse Brunellus at the beginning of the book is certainly the most remarkable. The model of the episode, as Umberto Eco explicitly acknowledged, is found in the third chapter of Voltaire's Zadig, in which the protagonist abduces some of the characteristics of the king's horse sought by royal officers without having seen it. So this kind of Oriental model of knowledge that is first imported in the Western episteme by this little novel written in the 17th century and then adapted by Zadig, comes into semiotics through Umberto Eco, and especially through Umberto Eco's modeling this episode of The Name of the Rose after Zadig. The theoretical part of this episode is then expounded upon by Umberto Eco in this article written in 1983, Horns whose insteps some hypotheses on three types of abduction. So my final claim is that we really should look at Asia and especially at Asian semiotics, not only because it's our future, but also because it's our past. Although we might not know it, some models of knowledge and some epistemological attitudes that are typical of semiotics might actually come from Asia and maybe from Korea. Thank you very much.